Jason Miner joins us on the Retire Sooner podcast. Jason, thanks for being here, man.
Hey, it's my pleasure, Wes. I appreciate the opportunity.
And you are coming to us, well, now it's live from, obviously we were listening to the podcast not live, but you're coming to us live from, I want to say Nashville, right?
Yeah, actually just south of Nashville, in Franklin, but basically Nashville.
So there's a couple of reasons I wanted to have Jason on, but first of all, Jason is in wealth management and he's a financial advisor, and he is someone that knows money, and he is a chartered retirement planning counselor, etc. And he's been doing this for, let's call it, almost 2 decades. But his background is crazy, really. It's kind of a crazy background that I've always wanted to know about, but it's so niche. There's so few people, and I'm not talking about niches and pro golfer. Okay. I'm not talking about like, hey, how long is it going to be pro golf? Dad, I want to be a pro golfer. Well, that's like that's a 1 in a million. What Jason has done is like 1 out of 10 million, which is essentially lived the life of a child star, a child actor, a child musician. It was part of the Mickey Mouse Club. Who's part of the Mickey Mouse Club? I don't know. Britney Spears, Justin Timberlake. Like, that's about it. And we are all so fascinated in this world of, there's every year or two, there's 1 or 2 big child stars. And granted, maybe you're not Michael J. Fox, but you are still part of a very, very sliver of a niche in an industry that is entertainment, where there's a lot of money flying around, and you see and then you see younger people that were in entertainment have money difficulties. So you've seen kind of the dark side of probably all of this. And I just think it's an amazingly fascinating topic. So I wanted to have you on the show, talk about that, among other things.
Yeah.
So let's start there. Kids and money. You came up as, you had success as an entertainment and music as a kid. Maybe let's start there. Just tell us a little bit about that background. When did you get started?
So I started really doing it, getting quote unquote paid, as an 8-year-old. So now I'm 44. So quite some time. I did local. I mean, you got to think back in the mid 80s, how things were done were completely different than today. But I grew up in the DC area, so I did a lot of what they call print work, when you'd get your Sunday paper, Saturday, advertisements for what was Hex, which is now Macy's, because they were located there in the DC area. Then I started doing commercials, got super lucky to do a lot of national commercials. One for Kenner Toys, which is now Mattel, did all of their Ghostbuster products back in the 80s. Did Jell-O pudding pop commercials back with, some guy named Bill Cosby, who unfortunately is no longer who he was when we grew up in the 80s. Which turned into just a lot of different things. I did a lot of dinner theater back then in the Washington, D.C. area. So I did different shows from Mame to Oliver to The King and I to Sound of Music. That turned into getting a manager in the DC area, 2 agents in New York. I'd go to New York quite a bit for those commercials. I did 2 national tours. So you're in the Atlanta area, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so the national tours I did came to the Fox Theater, which is a pretty awesome theater there in Atlanta.
Oh, it's amazing.
One of those was The Sound of Music with Debbie Boone. That went to Japan for 6 weeks when I was in the 5th grade. So be a tow-headed, blonde-headed kid, going to Tokyo and any of the surrounding villages back in 1988, I stuck out like a sore thumb in Japan.
They thought you were like a spirit from the cosmic.
Right, exactly.
Who is this guy?
Right.
Who is this guy?
The only thing that would have made me more weird is to be over 6 foot tall, and I am definitely not even remotely close to that. So that was cool. Came back, did a few different shows. Did a show in Connecticut where they actually created the show Annie in the late 70s, early 80s before it went to Broadway. That show was called The Little Rascals, which then got me a show without really an audition, which was unheard of, to do Teddy and Alice, which was short-lived on Broadway about Theodore Roosevelt. Then again, the next thing that kind of came to fruition after that, I did Gypsy on Broadway. And from there, Wes, is kind of where things really changed. All these other things were bit pieces. Let's call it more of like contract work when you do those type of things.
So you were in school and you were able to just kind of do this in your free time and your part time.
Yeah. So when you do the shows, when they're during the school year, the ones that were on the road, they have to by union law. So Equity Union is for theater, and then Screen Actors Guild, SAG, which most people hear about the SAG Awards. Those are all for television. So yeah, you're doing school. We'll call it more like you're homeschooled, pretty much. You're tutored. You're going at your own pace. Those type of things. But when I did Gypsy, had an opportunity that Matt Casella was the casting director for almost all of the super famous people on the Mickey Mouse Club. I call them the Sexy Six or the Fabulous Five. You named a few: Brittany, Justin, and then there's Christina Aguilera. JC from NSYNC is also on there. And then for all the ladies out there who, may remember this guy named Ryan Gosling, he was there. Now, most of those came after I left, but the same guy kind of, hired us all. So that's kind of the short of that part of my career as a kid. Went to school, moved here to Nashville eventually to do music. And that's kind of where we eventually get to where I am today. Once the music kind of, does what music does, and you kind of realize where you are and where you may or may not go, and the luck of how it all works, or, whatever it comes out to. And that's kind of where I am today. So
your career, so you were an actor, and obviously you did lots of acting, and then, but really a singer. So is another thing that set you apart big time, to be in that league of really the very, very best singers. So that is still is that one of your loves still?
So I would say yes. So it's definitely a passion. I am definitely aware of my abilities. Performance is probably a performer is really what it came down to. I saw Michael Jackson in concert in 1988, and I remember telling my dad, I was like, "Dad, that's what I want to do." When I was 11. Mm-hmm. And my dad's like for real? I'm like, yeah, I want to be in front of all these people, and this is what I want to do. So the singing, the dancing, I really tried to become a triple threat, Wes. It was my manager, as crazy as this sounds, in Maryland. She was Miss Maryland, before I became, a client of hers. And one of her things was, you need to learn to do all of it, just in case you ever get the opportunity to do any one of the three. Now, I will tell you with all sincerity, man, I was a good dancer. I wasn't a great dancer. I at least knew you weren't going to see a Baryshnikov out on stage by any stretch of the imagination, a Gregory Hines and tap, those type of things. But I knew what I needed to do to make myself different, or try to make myself different.
Well, okay, so let's talk about, so you get thrown into all this, and you start out little by little, and it becomes a big time thing. And then you in particular, but also just child stars, right? How much money gets thrown at these kids, early on? And
so back then it was a little bit different. When you were on cable television, which is what the Mickey Mouse Club was on in the Disney Channel, your pay was significantly different than if you were on. I had friends on NBC and things like that during prime time. So what we consider prime time, at least in the central time zone, is 7 to 10 o'clock at night, whereas on the East Coast, you're 8 to 11. That pay back then, and I'm totally open with anybody on this. At that time, minimum wage, so listen to what I'm saying, it's totally different. For a principal actor, meaning you were a lead part pretty much on a sitcom every episode for 26 episodes, more than likely you were making $20,000 to $25,000 a week in 89, 90, 91, 92. It's significantly more than that, obviously, these days. And we all kind of know the old school, or maybe if you, you're not into pop culture, the big deal was when Friends was going to get canceled in the late 90s because they couldn't come up with a contract. Each of those people were paid $1 million an episode.
Yeah. Incredible.
They were adults at that point. But your question is, what is it? Theater was different, much less, but television, even for us, was quite significant when you think most of my buddies at 14 and 15 were cutting grass, shoveling rocks for landscape companies, or whatever they needed to do. It's a significant amount of money at that time in your life.
So with you're talking about Disney was paying the 25K a week, or is that the NBC people on sitcoms?
CBS, Fox, ABC. That's what the going rate was then. Disney was about, I think we were more around like $5,000 a week.
So not as much. Okay, not as much because it wasn't quote prime time.
Yeah, the cable contracts were a lot more restrictive back then. And of course, most of those were, Disney then was replaying Disney movies and cartoons and stuff, and HBO, Cinemax, and I guess those were the big two in the late 90s or, early 90s. They're just redoing movies. They weren't making really their own original content like they do. So a lot of those things have changed.
So when you're in your stage, when you're a teenager or preteen, and you're making $5,000 a week, $10,000 a week, and your buddies are making $20,000 a week, what happens? So what happens typically? And is it mostly good parents that are good stewards and help, or is it mostly the other way around?
I would say it's probably 50-50, unfortunately, Wes. I saw it both ways. I was fortunate with the Disney Channel, or with Disney. We all moved to Florida. It wasn't done out in California where there's a ton to do. We were part of the new opening of what was Hollywood Studios, or MGM Studios back then, excuse me. And so all parents moved for the most part. And so they all lived there. Whereas you had friends out in California where they'd go with one parent living out there with them. I had a guardian for a while. By SAG rules, so Screen Actors Guild rules, and it was made up way back after The Little Rascals was done because parents were spending all the kids' money. Mm-hmm. You have to put 33% of your income after taxes into a trust. And it's just
it's mandated by SAG.
By SAG for that reason, so that it would only, and you can touch it when you're 18. Now, truth be told, you can change the trusts. If your parent is the trustee of the trust, they could change the trust. And I've talked to people about this too. If they are blessed to be in something that lasts longer. I think if anybody watches like Young Sheldon, for example, on CBS, I mean, those kids are probably crushing it. I would change the trust differently, if it was one of my kids, to make that stretch out a little bit different. But really, like any basic trust at 18, whatever money you make or have made is automatically yours as soon as you become, per government guidelines, an adult and can have your own bank account.
So maybe give me a cautionary tale, or I don't know if this was you either. Well, actually, why don't we talk about you? Was your experience? I mean, when you're 14, you have no idea, right, about all this money, right? It's no idea,
right?
And then I think it makes it even harder as you get into and you transition into, let's say, going into let's say the financial business as an example, maybe not,
right?
But what was your experience like? Were you able to save a bunch, or did your parents spend a bunch?
No, so I was able to save a bunch. I mean, I kind of lived, once I did the Mickey Mouse Club, I lived quite a bit where I paid my own bills, even as a 13, 14, 15-year-old. My dad he did life insurance for a long time, or group health insurance, and then went into the mortgage business. So I think the one good thing for me is my dad kind of dripped on me a little bit. I mean, a lot of time in airplanes, man, a lot of time in cars or trains to go to New York. Just kind of dripped on me to be like, set yourself up. Let's do something different. So the trust was put into a trust that I was going to touch at 18 to help pay for school if I didn't get scholarships or anything like that. Help, move forward in life. But my mom and dad, for me, never lived well beyond their means, quite honestly, Wes. And we weren't struggling, I'll be honest with you either. So they kind of instilled in me pretty early on. And part of the reason why my dad made me like open a bank account, even though it had his name on it, and pay the bill, like literally pay the rent on the apartment, pay the gas bill, the electric bill, the phone bill, was to get an idea of this is what life is when you're making like real money, not just enough money to hang out with your buddies, on the weekend.
Right. So that's the complexity of this. Now, let me ask you, let's say so you had a real education, and it sounds like your parents were responsible about this. What's the other side of the spectrum?
Well, it's funny you say that. So I did a reunion with the Mickey Mouse Club 2 years ago, and then went back out February of 2020, and talked with one of the guys that works with an attorney who was with me. He and I are the same age, with kids for SAG. And he said, man, you really need to kind of figure out a way to get in front of more of these people. He goes, because if I would have known at 18, when they just plumped a lump sum of cash basically in my checking account, what I know now, I would be living high on the hog. And I said, you're right. Now, he wasn't so frivolous that it only took 6 months to wipe through it all, or 12 months. It did last longer, but that old adage of once they see it, kind of like athletes, you get this lump sum of money and, well, I can get this. You think it's still going to keep coming because at 18, you think, man, I've been super blessed for a long period of time. I can just keep making this work. Well, hey, guess what? Like an athlete, now you've taken that pool that was huge and you've super, 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 super narrowed it, and you're no different than anybody else. You're no longer the 16-year-old. Now you're the 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old. And now you've really got to fight. Fight, because now you've got to provide for yourself more than likely. Then it didn't much matter. You went in there with no stress because you still had a roof over your head. You still had somebody taking you to an audition, somebody paying for your music lessons or whatever they are. And you didn't have to worry about it, So my biggest thing is trying to, when I meet kids here who have talent, most of it's musical talent here in the Nashville area. It's changing some, Wes, but I kind of tell them, I say, look, at the end of the day, when it comes to a lot of things, you need to be cautiously narcissistic. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean you need to think about how this is going to affect you, how you need to save for you, because there will be bad times. But don't be a jerk in the middle of all of it either. Like, learn to communicate with humans, but you still got to be prepared. Do you understand what it does when you take out that debit card and there's no more money? Those are the conversations I'm having.
Do you see, so were there scenarios where parents, even in let's say the modern era, where they, I guess SAG, you're saying, is enforce this 1/3 rule, but you're saying that parents half the time are kind of just taking advantage of the money, or maybe not even taking advantage, but they're just using that as their money? That happens, I would think, a lot.
I would say it still happens more than you probably would want it to happen. Yes. Truth, you and I were talking just a bit earlier. Just like if you have kids that dance and do travel dance or cheerleading or any of those type of sports, or they're
baseball, baseball, right. Travel baseball,
spending quite a bit of money. But if you're going to, and again, in this current age, and especially now that we've gone through COVID, a lot of things have changed with Zooms and things like that. But you were still going out to LA for a while, 5, 6 months during pilot season, and living out there. More than likely, if your parents weren't already a one income family, they now are, so that whether it's your mom, your dad, somebody is out there with you while you're doing it. So I think the initial thought process is, if you get lucky, we're just paying for what mom or dad or aunt or uncle was
would have made anyway.
Yeah, anyway. But then, like, I think, unfortunately, when a kid starts making that much money, you take 33% off the top, and then they've got all this money left over. I think, unfortunately, greed still gets into people's mindsets, and it does happen. Or it's, again, I use the athlete because I think that's so much more prevalent. Is somebody says, "Oh man, you've got an extra 50K that you don't need, or 100,000. Come invest into this widget,
restaurant."
Yeah, whatever. Invest into this widget, and we'll take your 100,000 and make it 500,000 in a period of time. And like you and I both know, I always say, if it sounds too good, it might be too good. And I'm okay if you get to a point, and it is like you said earlier, when you talk about millions and millions and millions of dollars. We'll use Britney for example, just because Britney Spears, because she's so in the forefront of the whole Free Britney movement, right? Is you still have to have somebody or someone that kind of puts the brakes and says, all right, let's stop the process for a moment.
Let's tell me about Free Britney, because I don't know. I see it. I mean, I've seen clips about it, and I've been hearing rumblings for a couple of years about it, and now it feels as though it's really come to a head. Right. I would say, if anybody that can comment on this, what the hell happened there? Explain to our audience what the Free Britney thing is and what happened, and where should she go from here?
So this is what I can tell you. I mean, I wasn't in her inner circle by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah,
I can just tell you,
as an outsider.
Yeah, outsider. What I can tell you is this: you start making that kind of money. I didn't make anywhere close to, what I would just call funny money, play money in that situation where you're worth, 80, 90, 100, $200 million like she is. But before that happens, like when we were on the Mickey Mouse Club, there is still a chance where people think this kid can be really good. So I'm going to kind of latch on to this kid and help them out. Mm-hmm. And I think what happened with her is it got big quick, man. I mean, it just exploded. And then it's, your name and likeness and all that kind of stuff, even before Twitter and TikTok and all the other stuff that we have today. And it just starts cranking and the money just starts coming in. And so she's a kid, and there's never a no person. Nobody ever says no. They all say, yeah, we can do that for you, Brittany. We can do that for you, whoever. And so for Brittany, it eventually got to a point. I don't know her parents, but I'm going to try and err on the side of just being vanilla. I think her dad wanted some extra cash, mm-hmm. but I think her dad said, this is getting, wild, and she's dating Justin, and we've got to put something together. Then the Justin Timberlake thing, broke up. She meets Kevin Federline. She has a ridiculous amount of money. She starts having kids at a young age. And her dad's like, what the heck? Mm-hmm. We've got to kind of do something, put it all into a trust. Well, then we get into that conservatorship once she shaves her head and does all that. Do I think at that point, more than likely, from what I know and what people have told me, Wes, I do think there was some time in her life then that she was kind of not 100% thinking straight. Okay.
And again, explain to our audience the conservatorship. So when does a conservatorship come into play?
A conservatorship, at least in this situation, came into play. Think of it almost as like if you've had an older parent who starts doing things with their money that they shouldn't because all of a sudden they've developed dementia or they've developed Alzheimer's or both kind of running at the same thing. You kind of become the controller of that person's finances. Well, in Brittany's case, it's crazy, Wes. It looks like it's the controller of life for her in the sense of you can't do this. You can't buy this. You can't have money for this. They were almost controlling what doctor she was going to. They really pulled a full belt around her life, which I didn't.
Now that is in the again, a conservatorship document can be written by an attorney, mm-hmm. and then it has to be stamped by approval of a court, correct?
Yes.
So you can draft a conservatorship in I guess a couple different ways, but it can be an ultra restrictive one, and then as long as the judge says yes, then that becomes a legal document. So that's kind of what happened then, I guess. So she made $100 million. So let me summarize. She made, let's call it $100 million plus. She went in her father's eyes, hey, kind of semi-crazy, not fully able to make her own decisions
Right.
with the kerosene of the money. And then he drew up a conservatorship. The court said yes. And then all of a sudden, he became the conservator legally of not just one of her bank accounts, but like sounds like her likeness, her brand, her income, and everything. And that's what happened, right?
Yeah, and that's the way I understand it. Even
and then
with
the free Britney thing then is the public finally becoming aware of that and saying, like, this doesn't seem fair.
Correct.
Hey, Dad, can't you let her out of this thing? And where are we on that? Like, what's happening with that?
So it looks like even as of recently as maybe a week or two ago. So I apologize if I don't remember the timing.
We're talking, by the way, we're in August here. We're mid-August.
Right. Correct. Sorry. Yes. So probably the end of July, beginning maybe last week, which is the first week in August, I believe the judge denied her request to have her dad removed as the acting conservator of the conservatorship. And she has actually requested to keep a conservatorship in place, but more than likely, as you're aware, like in some trusts, have more of a corporate conservator, somebody who's not emotionally tied or family related to make those decisions, somebody that can kind of give her the, no, Brittany, you've spent X amount of money. We've said we were only going to do X amount of money. So you're done for the month or whatever that may be.
Like a corporate trustee, like a Schwab trust, a New York.
Correct.
Yeah. Got it. Okay.
That is correct. So that is from what I understand as of right now. And I have a friend of mine who's very close to the situation that says that is kind of where they are. And I guess, unfortunately for Brittany, she's got to go back to the drawing board to try and convince the court again, like you said, because a judge stamped it years ago and they've opened it up to listen to it. I guess whatever the arguments are to drop her dad are not working. And we don't know what those conversations really are from the courtroom to say why or why not. It seems pretty cut and dry for us if you just follow, just the information we're given, but maybe there's something we just don't know, Wes.
Yeah, I don't know if I've seen an interview with her. Has there been any interviews? I mean, again, I guess the reason we're on this, by the way, so my Retire Sooner podcast audience is saying, Wes, why the hell are we talking about free Britney? Well, it's because this is a fascinating topic of young kids becoming stars, making millions of dollars, and they can turn out great. They can turn out where they had a responsible upbringing, or they can end up making all the money in the world and still not being able to access it, which is what happened with this situation. So it's just a fascinating conundrum. Really, it's really a shame. I mean, you would think that it's really a shame. Yeah. What would you do if you were Taylor Swift's dad and she were 10 and you were thinking, wait a minute, she might be really good someday?
Right. No. So it's funny you say that. So I have my oldest son who's 17, has an agent now and doing acting and things like that. And my wife and I have had this conversation. I told her, and that he's really, really focused. Like it seems like Taylor Swift was focused, right? But I mean, I would make sure that I would split it. I would make sure that there's a trust set up, okay, for a portion of that money. And in Taylor Swift's case, because she's a singer-songwriter, as far as I know, like ASCAP and BMI, which are the unions for writers, the writers' unions, okay, I don't believe that they have anything set up like SAG does. But I would still set up a trust for a portion of it. And probably in that situation, Wes, I would do almost 50% and say, hey, look, this is what we want to do. We want to set up this 50% because we just don't know where this is going to take you. And if you get blessed with that type of meteoric rise in popularity, your mom and I are going to set it up at 18, 21. I'm going to do more of a stretch type trust and set it up to where you're going to get portions of your money as you get older, so that if it all hits at one time and then it just stops, you get, God forbid, you lose your voice or you get nodules and you can never sing again or whatever that may be. I mean, I might set up something. I don't want to necessarily say a lifetime trust because I think it depends on the kid, but maybe something where it stretches it out and almost gives them, different dollar amounts as he gets older. But then I'd also allow him to still be a kid and say, look, if you want to buy a car that we agree upon when you're 16, because you've hustled from 10 to 16 doing what it is, your mom and I aren't going to say no. You worked for that money.
And this kind of goes back to, Jason, this kind of goes back to, when are kids financially grown-ups, right? And there's no perfect answer
Correct.
here, but it's probably not 18, right? So if you have this reservoir that builds at 18, all of a sudden you're 18 and you have $7 million in a trust. That's very different than saying, well, you're going to get a little bit of this,
right.
but then you're going to also be able to get a portion at 25.
Right.
And at 30 and 35, et cetera. Because I think kids are financially grown up and not going to change anymore in their work ethic by the time they're 35, maybe even 30.
No, I agree. If we're talking in averages, Wes, absolutely. I mean, I think out of my 3 kids, it's different for each of them. And we've talked about money. Not in a bad way, but we've talked about this is why we do things that we do in our house, or this is why we don't do things that we do. Here's why Mom and I've made this decision. Here's why we think you should have money set aside. For us, that's the way we've done it. But each of the kids, I would set it up differently, or I think they may become, as you said, financially mature in different times. I was definitely financially mature faster than my younger sister, who's just, I'm the oldest of 3. And I think it's just because of what I had to do and what my dad forced me to do. And I don't mean force in a bad way. I just mean he said, you got to learn how to do this at 14 and 15. So, but I don't disagree with you, especially if you're talking, well into this, 7 figures, 8 figures of stuff like that. Absolutely. It should be spread out. Or you just have a lot of different
problems that arise, almost too much money too soon. Yeah.
Correct. And especially if they're in the entertainment industry, or if your child is blessed to be a great athlete of some sort, you can't really do a trust when they, come straight out of college and they are drafted in the first round of whatever. But my point is, you just never know what's going to happen.
Well, so what is your advice then to your own kids? Or, well, I guess, are your kids musical at all? Are they in the music business at all or no?
Not in the music business. So my 17-year-old.
Oh, he's the actor. He's an actor.
Yeah. Acts, and he does musical theater like at the school and some of the things around Franklin here. And I tell everybody, as an actor, he's much better than I was at 16 and 17. He's got great timing. So we kind of push him towards that direction to go. I kind of tell him, because obviously we're looking at schools, Wes, because he's a rising, he's just started his 11th grade year last Friday here in the Nashville area. And so we've kind of said, as you look at schools, figure out where it is you want to go. If you want to still do this theater thing, your mom and I are 100% behind you, but there's a lot of schools that you can learn to do something else that you like while still doing the theater thing. The one thing about that creative side of stuff, in my opinion, from my experience, is if you're in the right place, especially in this day and age where it doesn't matter that you're in either LA or New York, like it used to be when I was doing it, you can learn to do other things that you enjoy doing while doing this other part of your life. But work towards that other part. If you want to do theater, then you need to work hard at it while working hard at something else, just in case. I'm always about just in case something doesn't go your way in a very subjective business.
Yeah, parallel tracks is what you're doing. So you've got
you've
got 2 really good, solid plans. Both can work, and you got to do that as a dad and a father. Yeah, as a parent. Well, listen, Jason, thank you so much, man. Fascinating conversation. Thank you for being on the podcast. When I'm in Tennessee, I'll come visit, and it's great to hear your perspective on all of this.
I appreciate it.
And doing what you do. So I appreciate it, man.
Yeah, Wes, I appreciate your time and having me on today, man.